Hello, welcome to MS's Create channel. In this video, we're going to see how to create a Graph API custom connector to get OneDrive file version. The existing OneDrive connector for Power Automate or Power Apps do not have a file version, so you cannot get the version of a file from the OneDrive. You need to do the Graph API call to get the file version. Let's start. To create the custom connector using the Graph API in the Power Platform, I have already published one detailed video on how to do these prerequisite steps. I'll just go through quickly in this video. Later you would see how to create those. So the first and the foremost thing, you should create an app in the Azure, enter ID, and you need to add the redirect URL for the app. And second thing, you should add the API permission, file read and file read all, so that you can read all the files from the OneDrive. And third, you should use the Graph Explorer API to get the response and the URL, so that you can call the Graph API. And finally, you need to add those API into the custom connector. So here we are going to use a different Graph URL, not this one. So let's see. Okay, here you can see the Power Automate. I have opened the Power Automate to add the OneDrive connector, which is the default connector from Microsoft. You can see there are several actions, predefined actions which are there. You cannot see the version of a OneDrive file. So we are going to create our own connector to get the file version. To start with, I have created an app. You can go into the Microsoft Azure portal and go to the Microsoft Enter ID and then the app. You can go to the app registration. You can see the app registration and create a new app. So once you create the app, you need to create a client and the secret. I already have the client and the secret. And you need to add the redirect URI. You can see here I have added two redirect URI. This is the URI directly from the custom connector. You would get it later when you create a custom connector. And you need the client ID here. So the client ID and the client secret is the one you need to copy, and make sure the API permission is set to file read and file read all and site read all. So this is the prerequisite for the Azure app to connect it to the custom connector. I have also discussed in brief about this, how to create setup, in my earlier video. You can see the video, I can put it in my description. So once the app is set, then we need to move on to the Graph Explorer. You can see here in the Graph Explorer, I have tested my one of the file. This is the file ID which I got from the OneDrive. You can see this is my OneDrive, and I'm trying to get the file version of a file from this for this file. And let's check here. There are 7 versions for this file. I'm going to get it through Graph API. I know the ID of this file. Maybe in the previous OneDrive activity I used it just to test. I copied the ID here. This is the URL. So go to the Graph Explorer and make sure that you give this URL and get this ready. You need this response to create a schema, and also this URL. And you can see this is the documentation. You can copy this URL as well and have it handy, so that you can copy paste into your method. Okay, let's go to the custom connector and start creating it. As you can see here, this is the custom connector which I created in my previous video. You can follow that same video, and what I'm going to do is that I'm going to add one more method to it. So just go to edit. You can see here this is the default. Make sure the host is graph.microsoft.com. Go to security and make sure that you have Auth 2.0, Azure Active Directory, the client ID and the client secret which you copied from there. Resource URL should be this, and this is auto generated. You can see here this is auto generated once it creates. Copy this and put it into your Azure URL once for the first time. I have discussed this in the other video briefly. So this is the existing action which we added in my previous video. Now we're going to add on additional step, which is file version history. So what I'm going to do is that get file version history, and okay, so this is the unique operation method which I'm adding. So here you need to import a sample. This is the get method, and this is the full URL. So just copy this, make sure that you copy with this bracket so that automatically the custom connector knows this is a parameter. So when you click on import, you could see here item ID automatically takes as a parameter from the path. So whenever so it becomes a parameter when you are in the connector. The next is about the response. This is a bit tricky one. So when you import, go back to your Graph Explorer, get your header. So this is the header. You can paste it here. You can paste the header here in case if you need it. Header is not mandatory for this, but this is very much mandatory. We need to change this response into a schema. You cannot directly paste this into the connector. So for that, what I am using is that I am using this tool, which is the Liquid Technologies. You just paste your original JSON response, then it automatically generates a schema. So you can see the schema here. You can see the schema here. Okay, and you can copy the schema and put it into your Visual Studio Code. This is my Visual Studio Code. You can put in the schema here, and after you copy the schema, you'll have to trim the schema because it has many of the additional information. So basically, what are the information which is additional? You don't really need this. You can remove this schema, and let me zoom it out. Editor layout. Let me zoom. How do I zoom? Okay, I zoomed it out, and you don't need this as well. This is an additional thing, and make sure that there is only one of an array. Like for example, if you see here, there are so many array. So these are repeated schema here. So you really don't need that. So probably you will have to stick with just one because it's an array. Okay, that's it. And make sure that you remove this as well because sometimes it gives you error. And what I'm going to do is that after trimming down all those, make sure you remove all the required field because sometimes the return from the version JSON response might not have all the fields. So some are optional, which we don't know. So better we remove everything. Okay. So this we can have it, or you can also remove this. So probably I'll remove it not to take any risk. Okay. Okay. So this is the trimmed schema. Make sure that you have a trimmed schema. Copy that and go back to your custom connector. So this is the custom connector, and for now you just add the header, import it, only the header will be there. Go back to the Swagger editor. You can see here the drive response. It has a header, the schema is empty here. So what we're going to do is that we're going to delete this and paste the schema which we copied from Visual Studio. It will automatically convert it to YAML. Yeah, just that's it. Okay, so now it has few errors. That's optional. That's like okay. So now we should have something like here. Okay, and then items. So make sure that you don't have the hyphen and the indentation is correct. That's it. So you need to do these kind of small modification before it to make it to work. So make sure there is no error here. Okay, so we just copied and then make sure that the indentation is correct. and the header is there. So now the method is there. You can see the method here and the properties here. Make sure everything is correct. Now you update the connector. So once you update the connector, you need to test the connector. I know my file ID, so probably I will test with my file ID with the same file ID which is in the Graph Explorer. You can see here, this is the file ID, and I can put it into the Graph Explorer into the custom connector. Okay, so this has been updated. Let me test. So to test, I need to create a connection. Let me create the connection. It is creating a connection. Yeah, the connection is successful. So now I am going to test this operation. Make sure that you click the correct one. I know the ID of this file. So how do you get the ID of the file? So later I show you in the list OneDrive. In the Power Automate you can find out. So for now, make sure that you know the ID. So later I would show you that. Test the operation. You should get the version of this file. Okay, see here, I get all the version, all the 7 version which you see, you are getting it as a response. Ignore this warning because you always get this warning because of that type. So now our connector is ready. Let's close this and start using it within our Power Automate. So now I'm going to create a new Power Automate. You can see I'm creating a manually triggered Power Automate where I would use file version. Okay, file version, I'm creating it, and this is a manually triggered automate. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to list down all the files first using the existing OneDrive connector. You can see here in the OneDrive connector there is already one operations or the action which would list files from a folder. I'm checking that list files in a folder. So I'm going to use this existing one. Why? Because I want to get all the files within a particular folder. So in my case, my folder is in PA, sorry. So I'm going to get all the files within this PA folder and get the version for each file. So you can see here there are 2 files here, and this file, I don't know what are the versions it has. It has 3 versions and another file which has 5 versions. I'm going to iterate this 2 files. So before that, I told you that I know the ID. Why? Because I ran this once. Let me run this and show you how the ID is being generated for each file. I'm saving it and then I'll test it out. So the file has been saved. Now I'm going to test it out. So now I'm just running it to see the file ID. Run it for one time. It is going to execute for that folder. Okay, it was very fast. You can see the output. Okay, so you can see this output. There are 2 files and each file description is here. So you can see here the ID of the file. This is the main ID. You can copy this and see how it looks like. So let me copy this and then see how it looks like. I'm going to put that into the notepad and show you how it looks. Okay, so if you see here, this is the file, you can see, and this is how it looks like. And if you look down carefully, it always append drive ID. This is the drive ID and this is the original file ID. Okay, so this is the ID which I am using it for the Graph Explorer. You need to split it out by the dot and ignore this drive ID, and this is the file ID. You can copy this file ID and put it into the Graph Explorer to check. So you can copy this and put it in the Graph Explorer. Okay, and then run the version, you would see 3 versions available. Okay, so this is how you find the ID, and you'll have to segregate it back as well. Okay, so now what we're going to do is that with this ID, the connector which we created takes only this ID, not the drive ID. So we need to split that and remove the file ID only this file ID from this ID. Okay, so let's do that. Go to edit. So now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to add few variables so that I can parse those. So I'll just add initialize variable. So I'll add 2 variables for processing. So I'm going to declare that variable as HTML content, and this is going to be a string. Okay, and usually I change the name to reflect the variable name so that it's easy to identify. I'm going to declare another variable to store all the content. So this is going to be file versions, and this is again going to be a string. Okay, yeah, so I have 2 variables which are already there. Var file, I think I can note it as file ID because I need to get the ID from the file. Okay, so these 2 variables. So now let's add our connector. So when you go to the custom connector, we have pp OneDrive, and it should have the file version history. We added it recently, so the file version history is there, and the item ID is the file ID. So for this we'll have to iterate through this list. So probably as the initial step, I'll just map it to the ID, then it will automatically add the for each. So I'm just adding it just for the for each. So what I'm going to do is that here I'm going to set the variable, set variable, and this set variable is going to be the file ID, and here I'm going to add the formula here. So the formula would be first we need to split. So I'm going to split the value based on the dot. So go to the dynamic value and then get the ID, and we have a dot. So within single quote add the dot. Okay, so this will split the ID, one drive ID with the file ID, and I want to take the second value in the array which is indexed as 1. So what I have to do is that I'll have to take the value of 1. Okay, so split will return an array, and I'm taking the second index of the value array, so it can be added as a single formula. Just add it here, you get the file ID. So now we need to transfer this file ID to here. So just go back and add this file ID. Okay, so now our custom connector will execute for each file ID, and it will return you the JSON response, remember, and the JSON response I'm going to format in a nicer HTML format. So for that I'm going to use the create HTML table, and for the table you get the input from the previous, which is the body value, and I don't want it to be automatic, I want my custom column. So because it has so many of the values, I want only the predefined one. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to take only the few values which we need. We need the file name, okay, and the file name comes from, where does it come from? So does it has a file name? No. So your previous step does not have a file name, so the list file will have a file name. So you have the file name here, and version ID, version number. So the version number you will get it from here, ID is the version number, and the file size, you can get the file size from the size, and last modified modified. So the last modified is on last modified date and time, and modified by. So for the modified by, I want the name or the display name or the email. So probably email is easier. I'll just get the email. Okay. So now it will form a nicer HTML text for them to easily use it. So once it forms a HTML, this HTML is formed for each file. So I need to concatenate into a full HTML. So for that, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to use append to a string variable, and this is the HTML content. I'm going to append the HTML which is created. That's it. So now the full HTML is created. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to send it to as an email. Send email. So Office 365 Outlook. Yeah, send email, and I will send it to myself. And this is the my drive file version history. Okay, and I will just use the HTML content. Okay, that's it. So now our Power Automate is ready. Basically we just form a HTML, nicer format of HTML from the version which we got it from the OneDrive, and we just going to test that version. The file, the Power Automate has been saved, and then I'm going to test it out. Click on test. It's a manual trigger, so I'll have to trigger it manually, and once it get all the connections. Right now I have only 2 files, so it will iterate through 2 files and try to get the details. Okay, it has executed once and it is executing for the second one. Okay, yeah, see here, this is fine, and I should get an email. So this is the previous one. Let me check whether I am getting another email. So the email should be something with a different one. Let's wait for the email. Okay, the email has arrived. My drive file version history, and you can see here. So first file has 3 versions. You have the size, file name is missing, so we need to find out why, but we have the version. Yeah, the second one we have that, and then it has all the versions. Okay, so this is how you get the versions and the file name, the versions of the file. Okay, so this is how you get the file version using the OneDrive with the custom connector. Hope this is really helpful. Thank you.